Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're going to be looking at Wie schön leuchtet der Morgenstern, which translates to How beautifully shines the morning star. So this is the first video moving forward that I'm going to be doing them in order of the BWV numbers. If you didn't watch my video from yesterday, just listen to the beginning to see the reason why I am revamping the order in which I'm approaching the chorale analyses. Long story short, if you don't want to go back and watch that video, it is mainly due to the fact that the anthology that I was using was printing the same chorale harmonization more than once, and I found myself having made two of the same video for the exact same harmonization, no difference between the two of them. So I want to avoid that happening again, obviously, and I found a more reputable source, which I'm going to be using moving forward, and it organizes all the chorales in order in which they occur in the BWV collection. So that being said, this chorale, very straightforward, doesn't really ever modulate, stays pretty much in the key of F major the entire time, and it's pretty straightforward to analyze. So let's just hop right into the analysis. So we start off with an F major triad in root position, and then we move to E, G, C, and C. That is a C major triad in first inversion, which is our dominant. And then we immediately go right back to 1, F, A, C, and A. This is probably one of Bach's favorite chord progressions, but then again, it's kind of just a commentary on all chord progressions of this period of tonal music, a lot of 1s and 5s. We then have D, A, D, and F. That is a D minor triad in root position, which is our submediant 6. We then have A, C, F, and C. That's an F major triad in first inversion, so that's 6 going to 1, 6. We then have B flat, F, B flat, and D. That is a B flat major triad in root position, which is 4. We then have a passing tone in the bass before we get D, F, B flat, and D, which is another B flat major triad, but this time it's in first inversion. And then we have a passing tone in the bass again before we cadence on 1, F, F, A, and C, tonic triad. So 4 going to 1 would imply that this is a plagal cadence. So moving forward, we have another one of those nebulous cadences where it very well could be argued that we are in the key of C major, but I still hear it as a half cadence, so I'm going to analyze it as such, but I'll offer some C major analysis as well once I finish analyzing the phrase. So we have B flat, F, B flat, and D, another root position B flat major triad, which is 4. We then have A, G, B flat, and E. I reckon this A is our non-chord tone here, and we're actually looking at G, G, B flat, and E, which is an E diminished triad over G, or 7, 6, which is a pretty common progression coming from 4. We then have A, F, C, and F. That's an F major triad in first inversion, so 1, 6. Then we have some non-chord tones in the bottom 3 voices, which spells out B natural, D, D, and F, and that is a passing B diminished chord, so that would be 7 of 5, as B is the leading tone to C, and C is our dominant. We then have C, E, C, and E, which is a 5 chord without the 5th. We actually get the 5th on the end of 4. Then we have F, F, A, and D, which is a D minor triad in first inversion, kind of like a 1 chord, but we get the D in the melody, which trips us up a little bit of a deceptive progression. This would be 6, 6. Passing tone in the tenor. We then have G, D, G, and D. Very fascinating. We have an open 5th here, so it's, obviously there is a dominant that's being implied here, right? 5 of 5, but there's no third. So this to me says that this is very early Bach, because it's the fact that the third isn't present in the triad is very telling before we get a cadence on C major, C, E, G, and C, which is 5. I had to look a couple times to see if this was a typo, but no, this is in fact the way the chord is spelled, 2/5, G to D and G to D, which is really interesting. However, if you were to analyze this section in the key of C major, you could analyze it like so. You can call this 1/6 chord 4/6. You can call this 7 of 5 chord 7. You can call this 5 chord 1, similar to how we have 4, 7, 1 on the previous 3 beats. We can call this 6/6 chord 2/6, as D minor is the supertonic in the key of C major. We can call this G open 5th 5, because it's no longer a secondary dominant. And we can call this C chord 1. And the analysis looks so much better in the key of C. I just hear it as a half cadence, so that's really where the dilemma comes with a lot of my analyses, where we have cadences on the dominant. Have we modulated or have we not? And I think it's a toss-up. It's not completely clear whether or not we've modulated. I'd say I hear the majority of them as half cadences, but it's definitely close, and it's honestly the reason why I analyze them both ways, because I hear them, I can hear the argument that you hear them both ways. We then have F, C, F, and A. There's our tonic triad in the key of F major. We then have B flat, F, F, and D. That's a root position B flat major triad, or 4. Passing tone in the tenor. We then have C, A, E, and C. A bit of a deceptive progression here, as we would expect 4 to go somewhere else. We would expect it to go to like 5, but instead it goes to 3 in first inversion, so 3/6. And when I say the term deceptive progression, I know it's usually associated with 5 going to something other than the tonic, but I think deceptive progressions can happen all over the place. When you get a chord when you get a chord progression where the bass goes where you expect it, or there is a noteworthy part of the chord that functions the way you expect it to, but the rest of the harmony is different, that's what I think a deceptive progression is, or that's how I look at it. So this 4 going to 3/6 as opposed to 4 going to 5, they both have the same bass. He even doubles the bass, but the inner voices recontextualize the chord with A and E rather than G and E, and that's where the deception comes from. Okay, so we have D, A, F, and B flat. That is a B flat major 7 chord over D, so 4, 6, 5. And then we have some non-chord tones going on in the bottom 3 voices. We have E, G, G, and B flat. That is a E diminished triad in root positions, so that would be 7. And then we have F, A, C, and A, our tonic triad. Notice when we link 4 to 1, we always include the passing passing 7th. Pretty much always. This is going to be consistent across Bach's chorale harmonizations. The passing 7th is going to be the minimum, but it often gets fully voiced as a 7 chord or as a 5 chord. Or more specifically, a 5/7 chord. Alright. And then we get some rotation of the voices here, but the chord stays the same. We then have C, G, F, and G. I think what's being implied here is a 5 chord with a 4/3 suspension over the bass, because we get the B flat and the E happening at the same time here on beat 3. We also have a passing tone in the tenor, so the chord gets turned into a 7 chord here on beat 2. And then on beat 3 we cadence on F major, F, A, C, and F, which is a perfect authentic cadence. Alright, moving forward into the B section, we have 2 short phrases that are really only a couple beats in length. We have C major, which is a 5 chord, going to F major, F, C, F, and A. which is an imperfect authentic cadence, because notice how A is in the melody. We actually get two pretty much identical phrases except for the harmonies change. So we get the same melodic movement, C going down to A, which really just implies the same thing happening here, except for the harmony that we have in the second phrase. The first phrase is complement, has a little bit of suspension action going on, a 4-3 suspension, or an accented non-chord tone happening over the bass, but it's still just really 5 going to 1 in another imperfect authentic cadence. Then we have a relatively long phrase here. It's the longest phrase in the entirety of the chorale. But yeah, we pretty much are still in the key of F major, because the cadence we get at the end is perfect authentic. Let's keep analyzing. So we have F, C, F, and A. That's a tonic triad, no need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the bass. And then we get this figure that we see in a lot of Bach's music, actually. Stepwise motion, and then skipping. Stepwise motion, and then skipping. And what this does is he usually harmonizes a chord. In this case, he harmonizes 1. The second beat of the figure, the chord becomes inverted. So this would be a 1-6 chord. A, C, F, and A. And then when he skips down, that just naturally reinverts the chord back to root position. And the same thing happens on the next beat. We have C, C, E, and G. That's a 5 chord with a passing tone in the bass. It turns into 5-6 on this beat, E, C, E, and G. And then the chord reinverts on 4 and. We then have this pretty much the exact same figure as we do on the first 2 beats of the previous measure. We have 1 passing tone, 1-6, right? A, C, F, and A, and then 5-3 on this beat because the bass skips down. And then we get something similar. We get a 5 chord afterwards, but it doesn't follow the same bass figuration. We have C, C, E, and G, which is a 5 chord. Then we have B flat, C, F, and A, and I reckon that this B flat's an accented non-chord tone. It is actually A, C, F, and A, as we expect 5 to go to some type of 1 chord or something that shares a bass with 1, or some type of deceptive progression, but 5 typically goes to 1. We have a 1-6 chord here in this case. And then we're getting ready for the cadence. We have G, D, G, and B flat. That is a G minor triad in root position, so that would be 2-6, or sorry, 2. I'm so used to Bach using 2-6 or 2-6-5 chords that I just set it on autopilot. That's kind of crazy. But no, this is a root position 2 chord. We then have B flat, D, F, and A. That's interesting, 2 going to 4. It's not unprecedented, but it's definitely not where you expect 2 to go. Because the chords share 2 notes in common, I reckon Bach is, and this is also not B, this is D, D, F, and A. So my apologies, this isn't a 4 chord at all. This is a 6 chord. So that's even more unusual, I would say. 2 and 6, 6 generally wants to go to 2. So saying that 2 goes to 6 is what I've been calling a transitive chord progression, right? The chord can go, if the chord wants to go in one direction, what's preventing it from going in the other direction, right? So the chords are related to one another, and it's when you see a transitive chord progression, it's headed back towards 1 via 4 rather than going towards 1 via 5. But once we get to 6, really, we can go anywhere. We have some passing tones in the alto and the bass as well. But yeah, 2 generally wants to go to 5, not the 6. And then 6 generally wants to go to 2. And that's what I mean by transitive, is that if one chord can go one way, it should be able to go back the same way using the same voice leading, right? That's my argument, at least. And then we have B flat, D, D, and G. There's our 2-6 chord. Let me just double check and see if I read that correctly. Yeah, no, that is a 2-6 chord. That's G minor over B flat. We then have C, C, E, and G. That's a C major triad in root position with 5. And then we cadence on 1, F, C, F, and F. Another open 5th, and he's cadencing on the open 5th. Definitely an artifact of Renaissance music. Early music in general that preceded Bach very much in all preferred the open fifth as a vertical consonance cadentially than the third. It really wasn't stylistically more popular to use thirds in the cadence until the end of the Renaissance. I remember doing a presentation for a Renaissance survey class during my master's, where we looked at, where I was ultimately just talking about how composers went from cadencing on the fifth to the third, and it never fully fell out of style. Composers still did it, but we started to see the third with more regularity, more consistently as the Renaissance progressed. But there was a period of time in the early Renaissance where they very seldom, if ever, cadenced with thirds, which is crazy because in tonal music we consider it like the music is conceived vertically for the most part. We're thinking about chords, we're thinking about where they go, as opposed to the individual voices. We're thinking about what the aggregate of the voices are as well. So when you only have a fifth here, there's no way to know whether or not the triad is minor or major. So either way, we know the major chord is being implied. We can make that assumption because we've had a bunch of cadences in the key of F major up until this point, and it would be quite bizarre if Bach just flipped the script and sprung F minor on us. It'd be very atypical. So I'll hedge my bets and say he was implying F major here. But this isn't the first chord we've seen that hasn't had a fifth in it, or sorry, a third in it. We saw the G chord as well not have a third in it. All right, moving ahead to the last cadence, which, as you can probably guess, is a perfect authentic cadence. We have D, D, A, and F. That's a root position D minor triad that gets inverted on the next beat because we get F in the bass, F, D, A, and F. We get A, C, A, and E with the passing seventh and the tenor, or sorry, the alto. This would be an A minor triad and root position. We would another example of like a transitive chord progression, right? We expect 6 to go to 2 and 3 to go to 6, but not 6 to go to 3. But then again, the argument is, or to restate the point, the argument is that if you can go in one direction using the voice leading, there's no reason why you can't just, U-turn and go in the other direction, right? The voice leading should be the same. And it just takes you to another realm of the harmonic, areas that you can go. 3 has different possibilities of where it can go in comparison to 6. Yeah, that's generally what it is. So let's look at B flat, D, F, and D. That is a B flat major triad and root position, which is 4. And then we get D, B flat, F, and D. That's just inverting the triad on the end of the beat. We then have F, 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 and C. It's another tonic triad without the fifth, but unlike the cadence, we get the third injected here during the tenor. The tenor's 2 and. We then have G, B flat, F, and B flat. You might be tempted to call this a 2-7 chord. And that might be possible. You might be able to call it a 2-7 chord without a fifth. I think this is actually an E diminished triad in first inversion, right? E diminished over G. And then we have A, C, C, and A. And the interesting thing about this chord is that we expect 7 to go to 1, but instead, or to 1-6 as we saw earlier, 7 to 1-6, 4, 1, 7, 6 to 1. It has all the makings of it, but we don't ever get an F until the next beat, or sorry, the next and. So this is actually a 3 chord. We have A, C, C, and A. 3 chord, I guess. I guess you could make the argument that all of these are sort of contributing to the chord that's happening on the next beat, which is the D, which adds D and F and A into the texture. But this is another D minor triad and root position, which would just be a 6 chord, which is where 3 wants to go. And granted, 7 wants to go to 1, and 3 and 1 share 2 notes in common. That's really what makes it a deceptive progression. If a chord goes from one place to where you don't expect it to, and generally that that place is adjacent via 2 notes with the chord that you expect it to go to. That's what generally a deceptive progression is. In this case, 7 going to 3 is 3 is a substitute for 1. But we have 3, 6, and then we would expect 2 afterwards, right? We're seeing 7, 3, 6, we would expect 2, but instead of getting 2, we get G, B, D, and F, which is G7 over B, which is 5, 6, 5 of 5. So we get a substitution for G minor. We get a G major triad as a foundation with the 7th on top of it instead. So this is just, instead of 2, 6, 5, we get 5, 6, 5 of 5. And really they're achieving the same thing. Just one's tonicizing the dominant and the other is a predominant. Even though the secondary dominant is functioning as a predominant as well. We have C, G, E, and G. A little bit of counterpoint going on in the tenor, a little bit of ornamentation. That's just a 5-chord root position. And then we cadence on 1, F, A, C, and F, with the 3rd intact as well. So all in all, this chorale was really straightforward to analyze. It was actually really interesting to see the open fifths in a couple of places as well. It's really fascinating. Other than that, really the chorale, the fact that it didn't really modulate, maybe you can make the argument that he moved to C here, but it really didn't modulate for the most part. It was really straightforward to analyze, and it's interesting to see progressions where we see chords going in different places that you don't necessarily expect them to in functionally harmonic music or music of a tonal period. And yeah, it's interesting. I'm expecting to see more development over time looking at Bach's chorales, because I imagine that even though we're looking at his vocal music now in order, I would imagine that we're going to see some type of chronological progression and see his music advance over time as it becomes more developed as a composer, but also as music around him starts to develop, because he's obviously inspired by the music he's hearing as well. But that being said, thanks for watching the video, everyone. I really appreciate the support for the channel, and I look forward to tomorrow's analysis. I hope you take care.